The People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Well, good evening and welcome to the People's Business Live. My name is Peter Wickham. In 2005, I accepted an invitation from Dr. Alison Leacock, who was at that point General Manager of CBC, to host a new public affairs program called The People's Business. Of course, I was subsequently released from that role, but in 2008, I was again invited by Director of Broadcasting, Rosemary Aline, to relaunch The People's Business or People's Business Live. Subsequently released from that role as well, but this year, Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation celebrates 60. And as we take a walk down memory lane with various programs, I have the honor of being a guest host tonight on People's Business Live again. Tonight we return to the roots of People's Business with a political angle that looks at current developments in Barbados. Local politics experienced a seismic shift recently when Mr. Ralph Thorne switched from the Barbados Labour Party to the Democratic Labour Party. The move was itself major, but add to it his elevation to the post of opposition leader and you have a momentous change. His return to the Democratic Labour Party was not a smooth one, with the first meeting to consider his application to rejoin ending in a decision to delay his admittance. DLP General Secretary Steve Blackett puts it this way.
We made a decision at this meeting to delay the admittance of Mr. Ralph Thorne into the Democratic Labour Party, and that is premised, of course, on the fact that we will have further consultations with him on his coming into the fellowship of this party. So that is where we're standing. By majority vote, the Executive Council of the party made that decision that we will have further consultations with Mr. Thorne, and therefore the decision to admit or not admit him into the party has been deferred until then.
Okay. Certainly it seemed that while there was some support for Mr. Thorne being embraced, not everyone felt that way. Now those cracks of division appear more evident with the recent no-confidence motion brought by the Democratic Labour Party member against President Dr. Ronnie Yearwood and also Mr. Steve Blackett and the entire Executive Council. Joining me to discuss these developments and look at possibilities that lie ahead for the Democratic Labour Party are three political scientists, and I should add three generations of political scientists, all of whom were taught by each other at various points in time, with Mr. Devaron Bruce being the most recent. We have Dr. George Belle, who is well known to us, former dean, former head of department of the University of the West Indies. Dr. Belle, welcome to the People's Business. We also have Dr. George Brathwaite, who is also associated with the University of the West Indies. And Dr. Brathwaite is, again, well known to the circles here at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. Dr. Brathwaite, welcome to the People's Business. And I also want to welcome Mr. Devaron Bruce, who is the most junior of the group, but nonetheless able, recent graduate at the University of the West Indies in political science as well. And Mr. Devaron Bruce, I welcome you to the commentary, and I'm sure that we will have an interesting conversation. This program is interactive, and you are encouraged, welcome later in the program to join us on 228-5562 or 228-5563, so you can give your own views and perspective in relation to these issues. This program, of course, is interactive, it is live, and we would love for you to join us and participate in discussion. So we take a break now, and when we come back, we commence our program, DLP Coping with Change. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the People's Business Live. Tonight we look at DLP coping with change. And I want to start the conversation with Dr. George Belle, as he's certainly the more senior and would have the longest institutional memory. And Dr. Belle, of course, you're familiar with the fact that this is not new to the Democratic Labour Party. They have previously had two leaders, a president and a political leader, where you had parliament, intra and extra parliament. So it is certainly nothing new. Dr. Belle, comparing the previous situation with Dr. Maskell and Mr. David Thompson and the current situation with Mr. Thorne and Dr. Yearwood, is this a path the Democratic Labour Party, having walked it before, is more familiar with, and do you think is having a more significant impact on the DLP's fortunes this time around?
Well, in this case, it is the culmination of years of decline, including the years when they were in government, in terms of leadership and stability of leadership and focus. Because even in the case of when Mr. Thompson took back over the leadership from Mr. Maskell, I don't think that the party had settled properly, and then he unfortunately departed quickly after becoming Prime Minister, so that destabilized the leadership again. The party has not recovered really from the time that Mr. Barr died, and in terms of leadership. And we are seeing the culmination of that now in what is going on with Mr. Thorne being used as a bridgehead to let the Democratic Labour Party gain presence in the lower chamber of Parliament, again having been excluded from it because of the nature of the vote.
Come next to Dr. Brathwaite. The Democratic Labour Party leadership has switched. I mean, do you think that the switch to Mr. Thorne was a good idea? Not so much from the perspective of public opinion, because it's difficult to gauge that, but do you think it was a good idea for Mr. Thorne, in his own interest and in the interest of the Democratic Labour Party, to cross the floor, take up the leadership of the Democratic Labour Party at this point in time?
Given the decision by Mr. Thorne that he was crossing and had thought over and decided that he would enter the ranks of the Democratic Labour Party, I think it would then become pragmatic. I do not think that there should have been the hullabaloo that emerged, but the hullabaloo became resonant because of the mishandling of it. But I see it as practical that once he's representing the Democratic Labour Party in the lower house, that automatically there would have been that space provided for him to be the political leader. I do not think it should have taken away anything from the presidency of the party. I think there can be two distinct channels in which you travel to arrive at the same destination.
Okay. All right. To the destination, and the destination I'm going to ask Mr. Bruce about is the reaction of the public to this. How do you believe that the move has been received within the Democratic Labour Party generally? Not that you have a special relationship with them, but just tell me if you feel that this has been well received within the DLP family and also outside in the general public, and if there's a difference in terms of how people appear to be perceiving or receiving this switch that they've made.
Good evening to your audience again, Peter. Now, I would say that the party has taken the advantage of Ralph Thorne joining the DLP, given the fact they've not had representation in the parliament since 2018. So I believe that many persons would have been excited in the party to see that level of representation again, and from an individual who many may consider to be a legal luminary, an individual who obviously would be able to represent the party quite well. Now, I would say certainly that there have been some divisions since then. Not everyone would have been excited of his rejoining of the party. In many ways, it might not have been organic. So you know that Ralph Thorne would have been a member before, but a younger generation, recent members, for instance, would not have been au fait with him, would not have known him on a personal level, so to speak, and certainly you would have that uncertainty from individuals who would not have been around during the Ralph Thorne period. So naturally, the fact that he joined the party and not in a more organic way, some might have been pleased and others less, more excited, I should say.
Okay. All right. I was planning to do this later, but I think I'm going to do it now so that we get a total sense, because one of the aspects we want to look at is the fortunes for Ronnie Yearwood as a politician. But I want to bring forward the conversation about the prospect for Ralph Thorne, because Ralph Thorne has a long history in Barbados' politics. I prepared a graphic which I'm going to ask the producer to post so that we can see. And this essentially, gentlemen, looks at Ralph Thorne as a political entity who we first would have heard about in 1990 when he competed against Prime Minister Motley in St. Michael Northeast, and he would have lost that primary to her. At that time, he represented the Barbados Labour Party, or he was seeking to represent the Barbados Labour Party. His next endeavour in politics was 1994, where he contested St. Michael North on behalf of the Democratic Labour Party, and he was unsuccessful in both of those endeavours. What I did for you was that I calculated the DLP swing and the personal swing to demonstrate how well or badly he did, even though he would have lost the seat, because the swing helps us to understand that. So in 1994, you can see that the DLP had a 12% swing. He, however, had a 15, suggesting that he underperformed the Democratic Labour Party by 3 percentage points. In 1999, in St. Michael North, again, he underperformed the Democratic Labour Party by 6 percentage points. So one could argue that as a DLP candidate, he underperformed in both of the elections that he contested. If you bring us forward now to the 2018, which was the first election that he would have won on the Barbados Labour Party ticket in Christchurch South now, you can see that if you look at the swing analysis again, he outperformed the Barbados Labour Party by 2 percentage points in 2018, and then in 2022, he outperformed the Barbados Labour Party again by 4%. So as a DLP entity, he underperformed the Democratic Labour Party. As a BLP, he appeared to overperform or outperform the BLP, suggesting that he brought something to the table under the Barbados Labour Party over and above what the Barbados Labour Party was bringing in Christchurch South. Of course, there's a difference. St. Michael North was, at the time, a Barbados Labour Party stronghold. Competing against the Barbados Labour Party would have been difficult. St. Michael Christchurch South is a peculiar seat in that it was always a strong Barbados Labour Party seat. Indeed, it was created for the Barbados Labour Party, so that may have been a factor there. The question, gentlemen, is against the background of data like this, what fortunes do we see for Mr. Ralph Thorne going forward? And is there any prospect for Mr. Ralph Thorne competing in Christchurch South and winning? Or alternatively, is it more likely that he will go somewhere else? I'm going to ask Dr. Belle, and I suspect that we'll take a break and then we come back and get the other perspective of the other analysts. Dr. Belle, what's your take on Ralph Thorne's future based on the type of information that I've given, his history in the BLP, well, the BLP, then the DLP, then the BLP again. Sorry, the BLP, then the DLP, and now the BLP again, right? And then what is the prospect for him going forward, and do you think he would change these?
Yeah, if we take your last position in relation to the statistics in the elections winning for the BLP, I think that why you are seeing a better performance there is because he's probably bringing some DLP support plus carrying all the Barbados Labour Party support, and to that extent he outperforms because he's carrying some Democratic Labour Party support. I don't put that down though to the particular skill of Mr. Thorne as a campaigner, because the first cases would suggest that he was not that effective, and that would have to be taken into account now that he has crossed the floor, because I think it would be, unless you're a kind of outstanding candidate and representative, it is unlikely that when you cross the floor you would carry the supporters that you had from the party that you ran for previously, and therefore I would expect him to underperform if he stayed in that constituency. and to lose most of the support or all of the support of the Barbados Labour Party, I would really conclude that if he stays in that constituency, he will lose the seat in the next election, and that he therefore has to look for another seat. He is in a position to possibly have some influence on choosing that seat, excepting there's one little catch in the Democratic Labour Party constitution. That's to say that the Executive Council can override where you go in terms of your candidature. Now, if there's rivalry going on in the party, and I think there's evidence to show that there are two factions that are operating in the party, one that is favorable towards Mr. Yearwood, and one that is favorable not towards Mr. Thorne as such, but towards the people who have used Mr. Thorne to get a bridgehead, who want to oust Mr. Yearwood, Dr. Yearwood. I think that with that being in mind, that you have a problem there for Mr. Thorne, you see. So I would say that he will have difficulty finding a seat in the, even that would be to his best advantage. He might eventually get to do that because Dr. Yarwood might not survive. But if Dr. Yarwood survives, he and Mr. Blackett could try to complicate things for him. And then he is at risk of losing his seat. And Mr. Barrow always used to say, you can't lead a party if you don't have a seat.
Yeah. Well said, Dr. Belle. Thank you for that comprehensive analysis. I'm anxious to hear the others and their take, and also anxious to hear which seat we think that Mr. Thorne will move towards, because I think that will be another factor. My views align in this issue quite well with that of Dr. Belle. But we take a break now. When we come back, we will hear from the others in relation to the future for Ralph Thorne. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the People's Business Live. Tonight we are looking at the Democratic Labour Party coping with change, and we are in the company of Drs. George Brathwaite and Belle, and Mr. Devaron Bruce, myself and Peter Wickham, and we are looking at DLP coping for change. When we broke, we had an analysis from Dr. Belle in terms of the future of Mr. Ralph Thorne. I'll turn to you now, Dr. Brathwaite, and ask you, what is your perspective based on what you've heard from Dr. Belle and also what you've seen from me in terms of the future of Mr. Ralph Thorne?
First of all, I have to concur with Dr. Bell's analysis. I think it is really spot on. I think one of the things that we tend to overlook sometimes is those things that are going on behind the scenes. And clearly there is the factionalism has gotten to the point where it is clear that there are agendas being put in place to derail the efforts of Mr. Yearwood. And I do not personally think that Mr. Thorne would subscribe to such an agenda. Nonetheless, he may be caught up in it, not of his own doing. And this is just the way the politics plays out in the background, and those persons willing to support. Mr. Thorne, in of himself, he brings the type of political capital that you can capitalize on in terms of his intelligence, his affinity, and really good-naturedness with generally speaking with people. I think those are really strong attributes on his side. And that may be part of what was borne out in terms of the last two elections running for the Barbados Labour Party that was not necessarily reflected as he matured through his career. But the point is, you also have to take into consideration the machinery, the political machinery behind him at the time. And I think the last two campaigns run by the Barbados Labour Party clearly demonstrated that it is a machinery of some reckoning, particularly in getting out the votes and moving things. And I think that would have helped. And I think that is something he will lose, and that is perhaps why he ought not to go back to St. Christchurch South if he's intended to really play that pivotal role in terms of the Democratic Labour Party. I think he really has to look for an alternative, and he has to get the support. And I would like to see more conversations, perhaps with him and Dr. Yearwood, in speaking about a synergized way forward, as opposed to so many elements creating noise within the context of the party.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction of the party branch for the Christchurch South for the Barbados Labour Party appears to have been very hostile to Mr. Thorne in the aftermath. You know, suggestions that he hasn't spoken to people and stuff like that. And it's difficult to see how he can fit comfortably into a DLP mold, or certainly he can't take them with him. In the case of Dr. Blackman, for example, in St. Michael, he said he took the entire branch with him. I think that it's pretty clear that on this instance there won't be anything like that happening. Early in the week, Devaron, you had raised a possible idea that he would be better off staying where he is because he had machinery, which is a view that appears to be at odds with what you've heard from the other two political analysts tonight, and certainly from myself, my own view. Can you defend your position, or alternatively, have you modified your position based on what the wise folk at the round table tonight have suggested? Or should I say wiser folk?
You see, the position was based on the fact that certainly any political leader should go in a seat that most favors them, and there are definitely seats in the space, so to speak, that would favor him more. But I really wanted to point to the fact that there are some advantages. So we spoke about the disadvantages, the fact he left the Barbados Labour Party, which has the machinery. Obviously, his supporters would have been disappointed of him leaving, but you can't refute the fact that now he has a level of notoriety as an opposition leader. He would have the party machinery of the DLP behind him as well too. And when you look at the seat itself, it is not as though it is a hardcore BLP seat. In 2008, the Democratic Labour Party won the seat. In 2013, and I think they lost the seat by 1% in 2003. So the seat is certainly competitive. So I just looked at some of the things that may act in his favor. But I think any political leader would go for a seat that must be most favorable towards him. So I would not say that I am in any real difference towards your conclusion.
Yeah. One of the points that we have to remember, though, about that seat, and I think Dr. Belle would be able to bear me out on this, but that seat was actually created for Bree St. John. Created for Bree St. John back in 91, I think would have been the time, when the Democratic Labour Party at that time made changes. And I think Bree St. John was a fairly competent leader. Bree St. John was a fairly able lawyer, and he was the type of person a lot of us felt should be in politics. But he struggled at the local level. And a lot of people argued at the time, and I know that Dr. Bell, you can respond to this, that the Dems were creating a seat for Bree that was easy enough for him to win, because he was the first prime minister that ever got beaten in office, and the feeling was that he was struggling at the local level, so you needed to create an easy seat. So it is naturally a Barbados Labour Party seat, and it was created for a BLP person that you wanted to have in Parliament that would struggle from time to time. Yes, of course, Dr. Walcott lost it, but ultimately I disagree to the extent that it's a BLP stronghold. Dr. Bell, is there any truth to that in terms of the origin?
No, I think you're correct. At the remember that the BLP in relation to Mr. St. John, they were coming out of that tremendous disappointment in '71 when he was actually the leader of the Barbados Labour Party and got defeated and that turned his political career, really around until the death of Mr. Adams, Tom Adams, and then he became the successor prime minister for a very short period then. But he always seemed to be vulnerable in Christchurch, in the constituency that was in place at that time, because there were sections of it that, yes, were very open to the mobilization by the Democratic Labour Party. But I think that his seat had become much more comfortable for him by the time he got back into Parliament and so on. And I think that really why that seat was lost by Mr. Walker is more Dr. Walker's fault in relation to his representativeness in this. He's a good minister, a good person in government, but he was not the most able representative, and therefore when he swing took place against the party, he was vulnerable, and that is when Mr. Boyce came through. But if you look at Mr. Boyce's record in that constituency, Mr. Boyce constantly struggled. That was his first victory after a long effort to get into Parliament. So that I will still come down and to the conclusion that is really a BLP seat, and it has a very effective team that works in that constituency as well. Some of the best organizers of constituency work in the Barbados Labour Party, I would risk saying, are in that constituency, and those fellows are going to be out to stop Mr. Thorne, and that is why I don't think there's much hope for him in that seat at all.
Yeah, and of course it's interesting that in the process now to replace the Barbados Labour Party candidate, another one of your students, Dr. Belle, has emerged as a prospect, but that's perhaps something it's too early to talk about. The producer said that I need to remind you that this is a call-in program, that you can call and join us on 228-5562 or 228-5563. And we do have callers. We have another aspect of this issue to discuss, but before we get to that, we take the first call for the night and say good night and welcome to the People's Business Live.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us.
Good night, Mr. Wickham. To you and your panel. I take in the end that common sense will prevail.
Are you there? Good night. Welcome to the People's Business Live.
Yeah, good night. I take in the end common sense will prevail.
Okay, can't hear. No.
Hello?
I'm here.
I take it the end common sense will prevail.
We're going to see if we can sort that technical issue out. Remember, you can call us on 228-5562 or 228-5563. I was having some challenges hearing the caller just now, so hopefully we can get that sorted out. In the meantime, we need to look at the other aspect of this issue, which is the fortunes of Dr. Yearwood. Dr. Yearwood competed in a primary, somewhat like Mr. Thorne, against an individual member of Parliament, Ms. Husbands, in I believe it would have been in anticipation of the 2018 election, and he did not succeed in that primary. He lost to her. Sandra Husbands became the Member of Parliament. She won the primary and then she became the Member of Parliament. Ronnie Yearwood didn't cross the floor, and he competed against Sandra Husbands in the 2022 election, and that election was lost to Sandra Husbands. Technically speaking, he's been beaten by her within and outside the Barbados Labour Party. The question is, what are his fortunes likely to be going forward? He is now leading the Democratic Labour Party. Should I say he's now the president of the Democratic Labour Party. He's in a more senior role. His performance in the last election was above that of the Democratic Labour Party, but was certainly not good enough to be able to win the seat. The question is, can he defend St. James South? Or alternatively, is he likely to go elsewhere in pursuit of some fortune within the Democratic Labour Party? What I'll do is I'll ask Dr. Brathwaite to weigh in on that. Or better still, let me ask Devaron Mr. Bruce to weigh in on that issue, and then we see if we have enough time before we go to the break. So Mr. Bruce, all over to you now regarding the future of Dr. Ronnie Yearwood.
I think regardless of whatever seat he chooses to run in, he has to win a seat, because the reality is that he's playing a game within the DLP, and politics is really about parliamentary politics and national politics. So wherever he goes, he has to make sure that he's in a position to do well. So he has to ensure that he's not, in essence, damage in his constituency, whatever one he chooses. He has to ensure that he has party support behind him. He has to ensure there's funding behind him, and all the concerns that candidates should be thinking about going forward. I think that has to be the major discussion, the major consideration, ensuring that he is ready for candidacy. And these things become distractions because you have a situation where he is running currently the DLP, a party that's currently divided, and certainly, having to take on the Barbados Labour Party, having to take on the DLP in some instances, and also having to run in a constituency. So the question becomes whether or not you have the bandwidth to do all of those things. So if he's serious about leading the DLP going forward, if he's serious about his political career, he has to settle himself within a seat and ensure that he wins that seat in order to play the real game of politics.
I'm tempted to ask you, if you were advising him, what would you advise him to do? And I say this against the background that, to the best of my knowledge, you're not. But certainly, it's possible that you could in the future. So what advice would you give him in 30 seconds or less? Stay or go in St. James South?
Well, again, any political leader would have to consider the best seat for them. And quite frankly, St. James South may not be that place given the history of its outcomes electorally. As you mentioned, for instance, he's lost to Sandra Husbands. I think he won 36% of the vote. So he needs a 12-point swing at least in order to win that seat, which is quite high. The last person to do it would have been Donald in 2008, and that would have been a very strong swing. So he would certainly need to find maybe turf that might be a little more favorable towards him, given the fact he has some interest going forward in leading the DLP clearly. Okay. And he can't do it without a parliamentary seat.
Excellent response. So this is a good point at which we can take another break. When we come back, we will try again to take your calls and hope you can engage in this conversation with us. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Any Welcome back to the People's Business Live. Remember, our call number is 228-5562 and 228-5563. Let's see if we can get that caller on the line now to join us in the conversation. Good evening. Welcome to the People's Business Live.
Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening.
Okay. All right, we're going to still try and see if we can sort that problem out. So, Devaron, your perspective was an interesting one. I think that I'm anxious to hear what the other panelists think of your take on Dr. Yearwood's, because I got the impression coming on to the end that you were saying that it was probably best for him to leave and go and seek greener pastures, which is consistent with my own view. The greenest pastures in the Democratic Labour Party, in my opinion, would be St. John and the two stronger St. Philip seats. I think that Dr. Belle actually resides in one of those seats. Those would be the two seats the three seats that appear easiest to swing in favor of the Democratic Labour Party. Fortunately, the Democratic Labour Party has two prospective leaders, so one would assume that both of them would want to accommodate or to be running in one of those two seats. But the challenge is, while St. John is, one could say, relatively movable in terms of who is there, St. Philip has a tradition where they tend not to take well to carpetbaggers. St. Philip is also a place in which you have Dr. Eswick, who is a very strong DLP campaigner that may want to run again, and Michael Ashley, who was one of the top performers in the last election. The likelihood that either of those two individuals, if they are interested in politics, would want to give up their seats to either of the two prospective leaders is one that I am unsure about. And I'm also unsure how St. Philip will react to the idea of either of the two individuals coming as carpetbaggers to St. Philip. Dr. Belle is well placed to respond to that, since he is a Philippine himself and has an intimate knowledge of the workings of the Republic. Dr. Belle, what do you take of what Devaron has said and what I have said in relation to the idea of Dr. Yerwood going up to St. Philip, or alternatively going to St. John?
Anyway, we will let that pass, okay?
You're not a Philippine.
Right. I believe that those seats that you mentioned are the ones that a leader of the Democratic Labour Party would be aiming for. But as you've seen there, some of the strong candidates of the Democratic Labour Party are in St. Philip North and St. Philip West. So there's going to be a little struggle to get them to concede to move for either you, Mr. Thorne, or Dr. Yerwood. And I think they're going to have to keep searching. And what the kind of revolution, quote unquote, that happened in St. John, I don't think that is somewhere for him to risk going, although I'm getting feedback that he's actually working very hard in St. John. That is Dr. Yerwood. So that he probably is thinking that he can go there and also use the traditional thing of saying that the DLP leader comes from St. John. But all of that is actually to not recognize that it is riding on top of this division in the Democratic Labour Party. And while the Democratic Labour Party has been very much talking about unity, and I heard Dr. Brathwaite say that Mr. Thorne and Dr. Yerwood should work together. I've seen a lot of praying too in the meetings of the Democratic Labour Party, praying for unity and so on. My interpretation of what has happened in the Democratic Labour Party right up to now is that there's a determined faction in the Democratic Labour Party that wants to oust Dr. Yerwood, and it is the skill of Dr. Yerwood that has prevented him from being ousted already. That he prevented what was effectively a palace coup on him, attempted on him in the first instance, especially with his clever use of the category parliamentary caucus to contain the constitutionally based category parliamentary group within the Democratic Labour Party constitution. And he's paid good defensive strokes. I don't want to jump you, Peter, in terms of going into other areas, but it is tempting to say that this has led into a political mistake now which he made in the last week. But I would say that he definitely has to look somewhere. He's going to have a problem finding somewhere to rest. You also have to think about other people that are in the party that are looking for safe seats. Somebody like Alberto De Pisa, who is seen as a leader in the party. I don't know how they're going to work this thing out easily, to tell you the truth.
Right. All right, Dr. Belle, we're going to try again to see if we can get some public commentary. So we go back to the phone lines and say good evening and welcome to the People's Business Live. For the third time, let's try this.
Good evening.
Gentlemen, you're able to hear the call?
No.
You're not hearing either. Okay.
Good evening.
All right. Yeah, I think that we may need to abandon that for the time being. Dr. George Brathwaite, you were nodding furiously when Dr. Belle was speaking. Your take on this whole situation, and I don't think you live in the Republic yourself, so you're probably a slightly more dispassionate commentator in relation to what's likely to happen up there.
Yeah, St. Philip is, it's a challenge. It would be a challenge for either Dr. Yerwood or Mr. Thorne. In terms of St. John, again, we saw a radical change occur in 2018, and since then, alongside the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party, You can see the incumbent getting maximum support in order to carry out initiatives and to ensure that that seat does not easily or does not in any way go back to the Democratic Labour Party. Personally, I think I slightly differ with you and Dr. Bell in terms of where you should look. I think the cave-in now, I thought if he was to make a change, he should have made a change from almost immediately from the time he ascended to the leadership. I think the coming now in terms of looking to go somewhere else, while still having the mantle of carrying the party at this time, unless he's dethroned, and all the other things that go into political campaigning, knowing that you're now into your third year in terms of where the party needs to go before the next election. I think he needs to stand and fight, and I think he's brazen enough. He's demonstrated he has the courage, he has the intelligence. He needs to do a little bit more listening, certainly at the ground level. And I think that he may be able to put up a formidable challenge to the incumbent. Also recognizing that it would be going into a third term, and the laws of diminishing returns would tend to perhaps blow some sort of successful wins along towards him. But realistically, I think to jump now and to be in the confusion where the factionalism exists, where you still have oldsters trying to hang on desperately for whatever it costs, I do believe that Mr. Yerod needs to stand where he is, fight for the young people and the residents of that community, look to see what initiatives, what type of creativity and ingenuity he can bring in terms of programming and getting people on board, strengthen or mobilize and strengthen his base in St. James South. And I think at least he would give himself a fighting chance. If he goes anywhere else, he's going to get undermined by the same groups of persons or group of persons that are currently intending to intimidate him and to push for his leadership.
And I noticed that in all of this, we haven't contemplated the possibility that Don Valinis would return and make a try in St. James South as well. But that perhaps is another whole program on another occasion, because that would certainly be throw a spanner in the works. I do have a WhatsApp message that came in from Martin, and he's saying, gentlemen, there's a glaring silence, not a word from recent MPs under the Stewart administration and subsequently developed PISA administration of the Democratic Labour Party. Deafening silence also from Guy Hewitt, former Reverend Guy Hewitt, who was formerly within the Democratic Labour Party and who ran for leadership. So no Adriel Brathwaite, no Dr. Eswick, no Lashleys, no Jones, no Seeleys, and Kelman is also a silent voice. Can we read anything, gentlemen, into the silence of those individuals regarding this whole debacle within the Democratic Labour Party, as Martin is suggesting?
You want me to go?
Sorry, well, no, any of you that would want to comment on the question that came from the panel, from the audience?
I think that one of the things that is worrying the Democratic Labour Party is the issue of the authenticity of the leader. And it's not to say that nobody has come from outside the party and joined another party and been able to be relatively successful within that new organization. We have had people switching parties, you know. But to switch the party and go to the top immediately and then become the source of what would be the recovery of the party, that's a difficult one to manage. And it can easily cause resentment among people that feel that they have a longer history with the party, that understand the culture. And I think you're seeing some of that coming out in the Democratic Labour Party now. That picture, for instance, that we had in the paper recently when the resolution for no confidence in the Hardy Reid's resolution was being dealt with by the Executive Council. The picture of the General Secretary and Dr. Yarwood looking down on this piece of paper and that photograph being projected out into the media I don't think that some of the old timers are, and I mean old timers, not meaning that they're old, but the people that were in the Democratic Party for a long period of time, that that would look very good to them. I believe that could be offensive because it looks like if these people are examining some piece of paper, like almost an examination paper, and that they're going to be the judges on it. And people would ask the question, who is Dr. Yara to do that? You know, where is he coming from? And there are a number of things that he has done. And of course, that whole controversy there came from the fact that he went down to St. Lucia and really took the role almost of the leader of the opposition down there. There is that thing is going to be nagging at him all the time. Are you an authentic person for the for the leadership of the Democratic Labour Party? Can you carry the party's culture? Can you carry the party's memory? Can you relate to Errol Barra and so on? Somebody who recently was in the Barbados Labour Party, you know, and who was seen at one time as the protege of Owen Arthur, and used to glory in that position that he was going to be succeeding Owen Arthur down in St. Peter. How is this man now in the Democratic Labour Party playing this prominent role? He has political skill, and that is why he was able to get there anyhow. An opportunity, of course, what Machiavelli will call fortuna. He had the fortune of the opening, and he had the skill to manage it. But there is the cultural issue of, would be the other members of the Democratic Labour Party, especially the quote-unquote old-timers, would they be comfortable with this, if you use the harshest word, with this intruder playing such a prominent role in their party, walking about their building, telling them who should come in or who should go out, and things like that. All these things, each one of them could be offensive to them. And that is why I think that there is a determined faction in there that is saying, let us oust Dr. Yarwood. And he has been able to build a set of people around himself which protects him. And that is what has allowed him to survive this long. And if he can keep winning those battles, well, then he may succeed. But he's going to have a difficult road. It is a difficult road to travel.
Okay. All right. Well said, Dr. Belle. We're going to continue the conversation. I mean, there is another aspect of the issue in relation to the St. Lucia trip, no confidence motion, who was right and who was wrong. We're going to look at that when we come back for the final segment. But we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we have more People's Business Night. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the People's Business Live. Today we're looking at the current situation within the Democratic Labour Party, and I'm joined by fellow political scientists to look at this issue from different perspectives. I have a message here from Michael, who is suggesting that there may be possible St. Philip East being created if there are new seats being added, and that this could be an interesting development in which it could give a Dem an opportunity to move to St. Philip and hang on to the coattails of Michael Lashley, because I think the St. Philip East seat would be pretty much a DLP characteristic. So that also is interesting. I don't know if any of you gentlemen want to respond to that possibility, because that would be an easy DLP seat to create if the persons who redrew the boundaries wanted to. give a seat to either Mr. Thorne or Mr. Dr. Yearwood to run. And that would be interesting in that it would just be a question of whether or not St. Philip would accept someone from outside coming in there. But I'm anxious to respond to what Dr. Belle said before we broke for the break. Dr. Belle has consistently argued, and I do recall to his credit, that he raised these issues before Dr. Yearwood took on the leadership. The question of acceptance of Dr. Yearwood in the Democratic Labour Party and the idea that there was a too soonness, to use an unpopular phrase, to his movement to the Democratic Labour Party and the presumption that he would ascend to leadership. I think that Dr. Bell's comments are now essentially manifesting themselves, certainly as a reality, that there is that resistance within the Democratic Labour Party. My view on the whole St. Lucia situation was basically that it was handled badly. Certainly, Mr. Thorne apparently was invited. Maybe there should have been a conversation about who should go. But there clearly is an effort by Dr. Yearwood to hang on to the presumption that by winning an election and becoming president of the DLP, that it's all over, and that there would need to be this extent to which persons in there would have to defer to him as leader. Dr. Bell makes a valid point that you don't really earn respect within the Democratic Labour Party that way, and it's difficult for him to come and present himself ahead of all those other people and say who can come and go and whatnot. I agree with that analysis entirely. So where we are now in terms of this whole vote of no confidence, my view certainly was that he could have won the vote of no confidence quite easily. My sense is that the General Council and the Executive Council are stacked with so many people that are nominated by the President and also by the General Secretary of the Democratic Labour Party. It would be difficult to see how a vote within that group would fail. Having said that, I take the whole natural justice point and whatnot. But even if that happened, the issue would still persist about Dr. Yearwood's acceptance. And I think that that really is a fundamental issue. Frankly, I think he's fighting an uphill battle. I don't think the party is comfortable. And the question then for you, Dr. Brathwaite, as the next commentator would be, is there a future for Dr. Yearwood at all in terms of the Democratic Labour Party leadership, based on all that you've seen, based on the St. Lucia incident? Can you comment on that generally and just say what you think in terms of how it was handled?
Yeah, I think there was some mishandling, certainly in terms of the information that reached the public. It demonstrates that, or arguably, there was a lack of good communication between himself and Mr. Thorne, even if letters were sent to both, as some persons are saying. I do not know the facts. What I do know is that perception, as I always said, and I learned this from Dr. Bell, perception is politics. And if you're giving persons that you want to come in with this one-upsmanship thing and you make that decision, that lone decision that you're going to go and represent the party. Yeah, as president, yes, you represent the party, but you give to the opposition leader his due. So I think that there was miscommunication there. In terms of whether Mr. Yearwood has a future in terms of leadership, I think he has to, as Dr. Bell was suggesting, he has to win many more of these little battles in order to demonstrate, one, he's a warrior, two, he's been tested, and he proves himself. And the way you're going to do that, as I said, stay where you are, don't run away, regardless of the incumbent. Don't run away. You've been fighting your battles there. You've been trying to build your base there. You've been trying to put on programs for the young people and other persons in the country. Stay there and fight. If you lose the fight, well, then you look at the other one. But you need to win. It's a fight you need to win. To demonstrate, one, that there's a certain sense of maturity. I also say that he has to do a little bit more listening, particularly to people on the ground. Indeed, I get some criticism from people on the ground regarding Mr. Yearwood. But nonetheless, many more of them I'm hearing now are willing to support him because they want to see the Democratic Labour Party do well and Barbados has this vibrant democracy. So it is in his interest to embrace as many people, particularly at the bottom. He's also going to need the financiers and stuff like that and the persons at the higher echelons of society to support him. So he has to All he has to keep doing is buying. How do I buy in? How do I expand this group of stakeholders? How do I get people that will support me genuinely? How do I do as Dr. Bell is suggesting and become more genuine in the eyes of my constituents? That is what he needs to focus on.
Devaron, you are essentially going to have the final word in relation to this matter, and I want you to comment in this way. We have a political graveyard, quite frankly, building up within the Democratic Labour Party, with the likes of Dr. Haynes, Dr. Maskell, now Dr. Yearwood potentially. Either Dr. Yearwood or Mr. Starr, one of the two, will end up in that graveyard. Essentially, all of these are people who fought for the leadership of the Democratic Labour Party and failed to make it in politics thereafter as a result of not winning. And as I said, there's quite a few political corpses in that graveyard. And the question is there going to be another one? It's interesting that the BLP seems to have handled their business a lot better over the years. But nonetheless, the question is what is likely to happen? And would you like to comment generally on any of these issues which the gentlemen have raised in relation to how the whole St. Lucia thing was handled and whatnot? And what do we do going forward?
Interestingly enough, I have a slightly different version to Dr. Bell. So I take the point that naturally someone would have some difficulty if they've just arrived to a political party and ascend to leadership. But if the Democratic Labour Party is serious about looking at the future, none of the individuals of the past and the individuals that have been there will be in a position to take that party back to government. The lift of the need of the lift for the DLP is considerable. We're forgetting the extent of the loss in 2018. So this is not something where the DLP would come back in one election or two elections and take back government. That era of politics is long beyond us at this point. Peter, you would know that in 2018 they lost 30%, a 30-point swing against them. Right now, I think they have a 23-point swing against them. So quite frankly, the DLP needs to look 2 and 3 elections down into the future, and you can't do that with the individuals that have been there who can carry, so to speak, the memory of the DLP. Whoever leads the DLP going forward has to be someone who has 2 or 3 elections in the bag, so to speak, that they can carry a couple losses. That's the reality. So I think that the party has to look to the future, and the individual will have to be young, and a young individual will not have the memory of the DLP, and the DLP needs to recognize that.
All right. Well, I mean, and there's so many names that we could think of that would form part of that conversation. But gentlemen, this is a conversation which could go on and on, but unfortunately, no, we're going to have to pull up stumps and bring it to a close. I really enjoyed hosting the program. It was good to be in the company of persons who taught me politics, and indeed persons whom I taught politics. And they're persons who I work with as colleagues. And I appreciated very much you guys spending time with us tonight. Dr. Bell, thank you so much. Dr. Brathwaite, again, thank you. Mr. Devaron, Bruce, we appreciate your time. I want to apologize to the listeners in the audience for the inability of us to be able to take calls, because normally this format works a lot better when we have the interaction from you. But we'll see if we can get back to that in future programs. I'm not sure whether this guest appearance will be repeated in the future, but certainly if it is possible, I am more than happy to be part of future conversations. But I did enjoy very much being part of this one, and I brought back memories of people's business of old. So we'll see how the future goes. I want to say congratulations to the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation on the achievement of their 60th anniversary. Wishing them many happy years of broadcasting in the future. So again, thank you for joining us on The People's Business, and I do hope that you will join us next week, same time, same place, for another program. My name is Peter Wickham. Good to be with you. Take care and have a good evening.